My name is John Dickhute. I work at the Pentagon with the Army G4. Today's date is the 29th of January 2003. September 11th was exactly 1 month to the date that we had moved into our new offices in the 4th corridor on the 3rd floor of the Pentagon in the New Wedge. It was just a normal day. Then we started seeing reports about what was happening in New York. We couldn't believe it. Of course, with the type of work I do, we're tied in with other things that happen in the world, and we were getting feeds from all over as to what was going on. I was in my office, and I thought, well, I had something to deliver to a friend of mine down on the E-ring, and I figured, well, this is as good a time as any to do that. As I walked toward the door, I reached for the door, and a voice inside me said, "Don't go out." I stopped and just looked at the door, stared at the door, and I started to reach again. And I heard the same inner voice saying, "Don't go out." I turned and walked over to my colonel's office, which was near the door. And he had TV on, and the president was saying, "I'm returning to Washington." He was in Florida. And so the colonel and I listened to the president just for a few seconds. And then we started to walk toward the door again. And the building shook. And we felt this wave go across us, like someone had blown air across us. And the colonel looked at me, and I looked at him, and he said, "Get out." I reached for the door, opened the door. Directly across the hall from us was guys in the operations office. Their ceiling was in disarray. Lights were hanging out of the ceiling tiles were out. And people were screaming, and people coming out with blood and injuries. And I looked to my left in the hallway that would have been in at the time, and there's this black smoke. The blackest smoke I had ever seen. Since then, I sort of reminded me of what hell might look like. It's black as can be. And my immediate thought was, someone set a bomb off. And the smoke started billowing from the E-ring down toward us. We were in the C-ring. And so I turned to my right and just started casually exiting the building toward the E-ring. Smoke was starting to fill the corridors. As I was going out, two young men from the office across the hall from us were walking, and they had blood on them. So we walked with them to the escalators, got down the escalators and outside. As soon as we got out to center court, don't know where they came from. Nurses were on these guys immediately. So they were being taken care of, and I looked at my boss and I said, we're not doing any good here. Let's go on, because the center court started filling up with smoke. Smoke was billowing over the building and into center court. So we exited the building into the south parking, still not knowing what had happened. We thought a bomb had gone off, and we were sort of waiting for another bomb to go off. We figured, okay, somebody got into the building and set a couple bombs or something. So we were a little apprehensive. We got out to south parking. Everybody was trying their cell phones, and none of them were working. So I told my boss, I said, "Look, starting to close the south parking down." And I said, I'm okay. I'm going to jump in my car, which was very close to where we had exited the building, and go on over to Crystal City to call my wife, let her know I was okay. Went over to the church over near Crystal City, and I knew those people, and I knocked on the door and said, "Can I use your phones?" I was using their phones, and we found out at that point in time what had happened. The plane had actually hit the building. So I was just totally surprised. But at the same time, I was a little apprehensive because I figured my wife had heard the same thing, and she was probably going bananas at this point in time. So I finally got a hold of my wife. She was, of course, beside herself. And she says, look, they're moving a lot of military vehicles into Washington, where she worked. She said, I'm going to jump on the metro and come out to you. Let's meet at your mom and dad's. My parents live in Alexandria. So I said, okay, I'm on my way. So it took me a good half hour winding through the streets because traffic was starting to build up. I got to my parents' house. And, of course, they were totally ecstatic to see me because my dad had worked in the Pentagon, retired from the Pentagon about 16 years earlier. So he was very apprehensive and was very glad to see me at that time. My wife walked in. Of course, she grabbed me and held on to me for the longest time. And then finally she said, you're not going to believe what happened. So she had taken the metro out to the King Street station. And there was no buses because they were all trapped in Washington. And with traffic and everything closing down, they couldn't get the buses out to the suburbs. So my wife decided she was going to hitchhike. Her and another lady decided they were going to hitchhike. They were picked up by two stewards who had flown the airline into Dulles Airport the night before, the exact same plane. They were devastated because they knew the people that were flying the crew that day. So we both had experience at that point in time. My wife then told me what happened with my daughter. I have two teenage daughters at Robinson High School. And she was called by my oldest daughter, who said, Mom, where's Dad? What happened to Dad? And at that point in time, they didn't know, and neither did my wife. So we immediately called the school to let them know we were okay. Had the counselors go pull them out of class because they were watching this on TV. So they were of course were very apprehensive, knowing that I worked at the Pentagon. So we all gathered at home that night and were reflecting on what happened. And we just couldn't stop hugging each other because it was basically a very close experience. After September 11th, when we finally found out exactly where the plane had entered, because we had just heard the building shake and a thud, didn't hear the explosion, so we had no idea where the plane had actually entered. But with pictures of the Pentagon from the news and subsequent days later, I found out basically that about the timing, if I had gone out that door, I would have been at the E-ring, just feet from where the plane entered. About a year later, as memorial services were being put together for the one-year anniversary of September 11th, I was driving into work, and a thought just came to my mind. And it said, how many people that day also heard voices that told them, don't go to work today, or continue on down the stairs in the World Trade Center even though they were telling you to go back upstairs. Then I had a thought, how many people heard the voice and ignored it? Least to say, my faith has definitely had a boost since that day. I can't explain what the voice was. I owe it to my guardian angel or to a divine intervention. That was not my day, and therefore he was trying to tell me, don't go outside. Because the Kevlar walls and the steel door protected us from any fireball or heavy concussion from the actual impact. I went back to work the next day, working down in the Army Operations Center, because I had to go back to work. I just felt like I couldn't stay away. There was too much to be done. Of course, I had little to do. However, we were still coordinating the finding body bags, securing refrigeration units, and providing transportation to Dover for identification of the remains. So I had no problems going back into the Pentagon. I worked 12, 14-hour days for about a week after that, and had no problems walking back into the Pentagon. A few weeks later, they moved our office into the AMC building in Alexandria, and I felt lost. I felt like we had to get back in the Pentagon. That's where everybody was. That's where all our contacts were. As we were also participating in planning for the response to what had just happened. We were having trouble communicating because our office was in 4 different buildings throughout Northern Virginia, and we just couldn't function properly. A few weeks later, after September 11th, my daughter, teenage daughter, oldest daughter, and I were talking. About 2 weeks before September 11th, my daughter had come in to work with me, and I had scheduled her to meet with some college students who were also in the ROTC program, and they were ladies, young ladies, and I thought my daughter expressed some interest in possibly going into the military service after school. I figured, why not give her an opportunity to talk to some young ladies who were just a little bit older than her and talk to them about their experience. Well, when I brought her in that day, the 2 ROTC cadets just grabbed her and took her everywhere that they were going that day. That day, they went in to see Lieutenant General Maude. And even though my daughter was not part of the ROTC program, he extended to her one of his coins, as he did to the ROTC cadets. And at that point in time, my daughter realized that Lieutenant General Maude was one of those that was killed on September 11th. And she was deeply, deeply saddened by that experience. She said, "Dad, he was such a nice man. I mean, he gave me a coin and I wasn't even part of the group. They just dragged me along." And I said, "Alexandra, you met him for a reason. You had to meet him to experience something. And you just have to sit down and figure out what it was that you experienced." So, besides myself, 2 immediate members of my family were impacted by that day. And I still think to this day, why was I given the voice, and why did I heed the voice not to go outside? It will always live with me. I must be thankful that I've been given this extra time since September 11th, and been trying to make sense of it. Because where the plane entered was just short of where our office was. And because it came in at an angle, it went away from our offices. So I've been very blessed. And like I said, I have been very, very strengthened by this experience in my faith and in my beliefs. And I'm not embarrassed to tell anybody that yes, I heard a voice that day. And a voice told me not to go out. And so I didn't.